Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's AIM webinar, Deploy Gen AI with Confidence, Mastering Governance to Unleash AI's Potential. My name is Sasha Sicard. I'm the Education Manager here at AIM, and AIM is the proud host and producer of today's event. More importantly, we are so excited to have OpenText here with us today as the underwriter of today's webinar. We thank them so much for their support. But also, we want to thank you, our audience, for taking the time from your busy day to join us. We're so excited to have Mike Safar from OpenText here with us today. We're going to explore the world of generative AI tools and how to harness its power responsibly. You'll discover how applications are transforming how we interact with information. Our expert, Mike from OpenText, will dive deep into how you can master smart governance with a dive into essential governance practices that safeguard the deployment of Gen AI technologies. After this session, we hope that you walk away with the knowledge of how to unlock the power of generative AI safely in your organization, protecting your privacy while maximizing the benefits.
For some of you are familiar with Gen AI, but I want to kind of go at it a little bit from a beginner standpoint up front, so we can know what kind of level set where I am on it and where our company is and where the industry is. And from my perspective, I wanted to start off by saying that I really believe that information governance is really key to the success of these projects, of these Gen AI projects, and rolling it out in a very mature and comfortable, safe way. Without information governance, Gen AI projects are probably going to either underperform or they're going to fail. They're going to fail if people lose trust in it, if they have data leaks, if they have security issues, if they have a lot of hallucinations. They're going to be successful if they're very focused, if they're giving the answers we need, and we're not having a lot of data leak problems with it all. What does that mean? That means that your role as an information governance professional is more important than ever. You are critical to the success of this. And I'm actually going to have a slide later in at near the end that talks about how that is intersecting with the notion of AI governance. So we'll get into that. And there's a lot going on, but let me jump into this large language model concept. Carl Sagan, back in the 1970s, had a show called Cosmos that many of you probably remember. And he talked about in this the notion of humans being very unique in their need to stockpile enormous quantities of information outside our bodies. We're the only animal that stockpiles so much information outside our bodies. There are some that can store some little bits of information, but we can store a warehouse of information. And at the time in the 1970s, we called that the library. People did not have this concept of huge stores of content in digital form. Now, of course, we all know, it's a meme now or a cliche even, explosion of information and all of that. But what is that explosion of information? A library is pretty well curated. It's organized into subjects and authors, and it has a card catalog. It's very methodical in how you get at it. Every document has a table of contents, that sort of thing. So we're pretty comfortable in the library. But when it comes to information in our organization, 80 to 90% of that information is unstructured. And most of it, honestly, is not organized in any meaningful way. Even if you have document management and records management, you probably have decades of files that are in file shares that you know nothing about, and some of which is extremely valuable. You also have data which may be in a database and categorized, but there's unstructured information in those. One other thing I want to mention really, really quickly is that the unstructured information includes things like video and voicemail, And now we're able to get transcripts of that information. We're able to get chapter information. And through AI, we're even able to find objects. So we can actually look into a video and say, show me all the scenes that have cars in them or lampposts or whatever we're looking for. So actually, we have the ability to start categorizing this information, but we need to put it in context. Yeah, I wanted a way to kind of visualize what this AI problem really is about. With document management, records management, we've tried to categorize it, tried to make this information meaningful and approachable, but the volume of information and the various different places where you can find that unstructured information make it extremely unwieldy for the user. And so us as users, we are desperate to have the computer or AI help us figure out what all this information is. We'd like to just throw a big ball of unstructured data at that content, at that AI, and find out what's in that content. The problem is that the AI isn't as smart as we are, not yet. It's getting smarter, but without actually a little bit of helping and process, it's not going to make any more sense out of the bigger picture than we are. It needs context, it needs help. And I'm going to kind of walk through some of the elements that I think are necessary to help AI get smarter about that. Now, what is this new AI that we're talking about? AI has been around for decades. The basis of today's AI is neural networks. Neural networks have been around since the 80s, and back then people didn't even the experts didn't necessarily think that much about it. Well, a couple of things happened. First thing that happened is that we were able to build huge supercomputers that are able to create massive billions of neurons, uh, neural network nodes that can process this information. We've never had that ability before. The second thing is about 5 or 7 years ago, we started to see emerging this concept of the large language model. And I could go into a whole speech on what that's about. I won't. Let's just say that they were able to take the neural networks and apply that concept to very specifically to understanding human language in all of its different languages around the world, not just English, and to make semantic associations of that content, understand where the attention is. Now, these large language models have to be trained, and they're trained on the interwebs, which is messy. Okay. It's trained on Wikipedia. It's trained on Webster's Dictionary, Thesaurus. It's trained on the New York Times. So certain things are, trusted sources like Webster's, and some things are a little bit trusted like Wikipedia, but sketchy, and other websites not so much. Okay. So the good news is we've got a lot of understanding of human language, but we don't have a lot of understanding of necessarily what's good and what's bad without a little bit of help and direction from the companies building the large language model. But the reality is that in our work in our organizations, we only need that to help us communicate with each other. It's that common language and common understanding. What we really care about is the specifics of the information in our organization, the projects, the customer service apps, sales contracts. We want to be able to understand what's inside of that. It's actually very cool that we can do just that. We can actually combine our organizational information safely with the interwebs and be able to make sense out of that information. We need to be able to answer questions about our work and business. The problem is that these models are noisy, and if you don't give them a lot of direction, you're going to get what the computer scientists called hallucinations. That is, you can ask the AI for an answer, and maybe 80-90% of the time, it's going to give you an answer you expect. But sometimes it's going to hallucinate an answer that you aren't entirely comfortable with, okay? Or that which you know is just not right. Now, the way that works is that we're able to actually through some techniques and processing actually show you where those documents came from and to let you see a citation on it and actually check the source yourself. And that's actually a feature in and of itself. So, we can try to bring it back and make a decision about it on screen, that instant gratification, but we can also double check that or triple check it if or necessary. But we also don't want to reveal information that is secure, sensitive information. So we need to take care of that as well. How do we cut through this noise and misinformation? We need to be able to combine this and combine it in a way that we can get real work done, but only with that information that we're allowed to know about. And we want to be able to speak in our own language. One of the cool capabilities of these, and I'm going to get into capabilities right now, which is when you're using Gen AI, you're familiar with its ability to find information, to search, and it's essentially searching a compressed view of all of its knowledge. And so these large language models, one way that people express that is it's compressing the internet, and much like a JPEG image. Okay. And the cool thing is we can search that image. We can query for very specific information inside of it, and we can ask for a summary. We can actually zoom out. We can take document from our organization. We can digest the meaning of that, but then we can ask it to give us a shorter form of what that's like. And we can ask for that in our own language because it's actually able to make associations across languages. And when we ask that question, it's going to give the answer back in the language we're comfortable with real grammar that makes sense. And it feels like magic. It really does. But in the end of the day, believe it or not, it's just a bunch of numbers and some pretty cool math. But there's other things that we can do with this. Gen AI is getting a lot more sophisticated. That sophistication is some of it comes from the model, but some of it just comes from the clever ways in which we put things together. So being able to generate content, to actually draft a memo of something, or to review contracts and actually look at suggested contract language, things like that. Very, very specific use cases that are emerging and which OpenText is working on ourselves. Very novel uses of this technology. All of these capabilities are a new user interface, a natural human computer interaction through our own human language and our own semantics, our own understanding translated onto our own content. To be able to communicate with the computer, not in very terse terms, but in the terms that we want to hear about. So let me give you kind of a visual understanding of this. I'm not going to go too deep into this because I want to get into the infogov pretty quickly here. We're familiar with being able to look at a file, browse through content, and search and get a list of documents. But sometimes these browsing and this list of documents doesn't actually mean anything to us. Where do I start? If I'm new to this file, what do I need to know about it? Well, the cool thing is that we can actually ask that question. Summarize the information in this file, in all these folders, and tell me what I need to know. What's going on? What are the key points? And it can tell you that. And we can ask follow-up questions. We can ask very, very specific questions like, is happening here, to try to find out what the value of the contract is or what the discount rate is, things like that. It can pick this out of a large group of files and actually bring you the information, not just the document that creates it. Or we can actually generate a entire memo about the file, something that summarizes it and send that in an email. That's a draft. It may need a little bit of touch up along the way, but it's a good start. We won't have writer's block as we go on. Again, natural language applied to your own information. And when you're viewing a document, that document may be 100 pages long. Do you really want to hit page down, page down, page down, get to where you're wanting to find the information? You actually want to ask questions about it. Again, natural language, we can go through a big file or a big document and find what we're looking for because we've digested all of that information and been able to create a summary of it. Now, of course, you can verify that that summary is correct, and sometimes it won't be perfect, but it'll be really, really close. It'll give you some good ideas. You do want to verify what you're doing if it's really important email, but if you're just trying to get a sense of where this is going and get a general sense of things, that first view may be perfectly fine. So now what I want to do is quickly go through 6 information governance essentials that will get you into a much, much better spot to use Gen AI to give you a platform for where you're going with it. The first is curation. When you're doing a Gen AI project, you want to have a quick win. Okay. And so one thing you can do to get these quick wins is find a corpus of highly trafficked and generally available information that people need to refer to. Reference materials are really good, things where you need quick answers to small questions out of a large library and where you're comfortable with it and it doesn't have maybe a lot of sensitive information in it. What you also want to eject from that conversation is a whole bunch of noisy content that you don't know a lot about. You do not want to turn Gen AI on top of a huge file share and just say, "Hey, what's in this?" and give it to everybody because you're going to first of all, you're going to have a lot more hallucinations. You're going to have a lot more noisy information, but you're also going to have data leak potential, things like that. So, quick win is, beginning to curate what is a good candidate for that first Gen AI project where you have a lot of trust in the information already. The second thing you want to do as you dig and start expanding into broader and broader types of content is a more nuanced version of this curation, which is that we want to get rid of content sprawl. Content sprawl is that content that, like, for example, edited versions of content that are stored on OneDrive. I made 6 versions of this document and then finally I published it. What do I care about in the end? I care about the published version. So you want to try to tend to point the Gen AI towards that. You want to point it towards where the work is getting done and where you have a lot of management oversight over it. And what you want to eject from that is shadow IT, places where people are doing work off process and you don't have a lot of management control over it. You don't know that it's been properly secured, and you don't have a lot of metadata on it. Those are really going to wreck your Gen AI projects. One thing that's going to become critical over time is labeling of information. Now, you can throw millions and millions of documents at Gen AI and you can get value out of that. However, what you're going to see is that the more labeling you put on, the more richer the metadata is on that content, the better you're going to be able to use it, the more use cases you're going to be able to derive from that. So You may have fantastic metadata on portions of your content and not on others. Now, the cool thing is that we actually have available to customers a number of technologies that will help you with this labeling of terabytes of content to help you do it automatically, to help you review it in bulk. And one of the first technologies to help you with that labeling is extremely important, which is content analysis, which can help you find sensitive information, PII, health information, and begin to categorize that so that when you place it in the repository, it has the proper access controls on it. Intelligent document processing can go even a little bit deeper. It can do forms retrieval, and it can begin to actually pull some of that information, important information, into structured data and metadata that will help us be a lot more confident about what the Gen AI is retrieving. And so this, some of this will inform future applications and future use cases for you. If you're not using this, it will really, really be helpful in getting familiar with it and using it to start building the metadata that will create those use cases for you and business workspaces. And I'm going to go into this in a moment here. Of course, I've talked a lot about security already. The bad news is that Gen AI is not smart about automatically about revealing information. So you could very easily reveal sensitive information or private information without meaning to by throwing Gen AI on top of it. You really need to have your wits about you. And that's why I say highly, highly managed content is best, because then you know that it has those access controls on it and it's not going to just stupidly reveal something to you. The good news is that if you do that, Gen AI is actually very, very good at hiding that information. The way it's put together through the retrieval augmented generation is security filtered. So once you have that, you're good to go. And then it's just the tools you have already. But I would make a recommendation for security markings. Security markings help you to kind of have a cross referenced type of security so that you have the specific access controls, but you also have protections against contractors seeing certain types of information, foreign nationals and government work, that sort of thing. Context is critical here. Okay, to if you go to the internet and you ask it a general question about anything, you may have had this experience already. It doesn't quite give you the answer you're looking for. It may answer something completely off. It may misunderstand what you mean. Bring up the wrong band, bring up the wrong president, whatever, things like that. Does it know that Bush is H.W. Bush or George W. Bush? Maybe it doesn't know. Being able to help the user drill down on a specific set of information and then have it be in context and understand the connections to your data. So I would rather be able to get you specifically to an insurance claim that's connected to your insurance application, a human resource file that's connected to the human resource application. And so all of that metadata is coming in, and we have a holistic picture of it that's very, very well managed. And when you do that, you're going to get the most accurate, most trustworthy answers out of it. Otherwise, the AI is in the same situation as the user of trying to navigate through 25 different applications and make inferences about what matters across that crazy process in your organization. When you have a business workspace, you can tie all that together and we know the context of what you're trying to accomplish. AI governance is a growing field. When you look on the internet about AI governance, sometimes you'll get very, I would say, IT or computer science directed answers on what it is and how it plays in. But when you really look at it and you think about what it is, it's a form of information governance. The tenets of AI governance are the same as information governance. Transparency. What does transparency mean? It means that we know what the LLM is, we know what its capabilities are, we can explain to auditors what it's doing a little bit better. We want to understand the bias of it, and we want to try to get rid of as much bias as we possibly can. We want a privacy and data protection, so the infrastructure and the particular way it's presented to the user needs to be very attuned to security and data protection. Accountability. Part of the accountability and this transparency is an area of understanding what version of the model. There's a kind of a version control issue that's going on because these models are constantly being upgraded. You need to know and be able to explain that on this date, when this query was done, GPT-4 was being used, or Gemini version 1.5 was being used. And then 3 years later, what version was being used? You're going to get different answers out of those different models as they advance going forward. So being able to document that and keep an accounting of it will help you in regulatory issues. Now, one thing I want to make a real quick play for is pay attention to these regulations that are coming up. Now, some of them are soft recommendations, some of them are actually laws. Look at the European Union, just like with GDPR, the EU is European Commission is very on top of this. They have a proposal. The good news for a lot of organizations is that for internal use, I'm not an attorney, but the way I read it is a lot of your projects are going to be exempt from these regulations generally. When the regulations kick in has to do when it affects consumers and affects the public. So, for example, if you're just trying to understand a sales contract, you're probably exempt. But if you're trying to decide which candidates are going to be included in your final round of recruiting, then you probably need to be very careful about that. And the regulations are going to uh, ask, what is the bias of that? So you don't want to necessarily use the AI of today just out of the box to decide, oh, this is the right candidate to hire. You need to have your wits about you and be able to account for what you're doing. Privacy and protection are part of it. There's various parts of it, but the EU is probably at the forefront of these recommendations. US is kind of behind. Canada has I believe a law that is in draft as well, going through. They're fairly generic right now. They don't want to slow down progress, but I think as time goes by and as more mishaps happen, that you'll see more and more regulation of how they're used and how reporting happens on what's been going on. At the end of the day, again, we're trying to change the transaction between the user and the computer now. I mean, Gen AI is really bridging that gap. We can now begin to communicate with our information in a much more natural way, but we have to ensure that it is productive, it's accurate, it's secure. Of course, I showed you kind of a teaser before. Our AI is Content Aviator. Content Aviator is an embedded Gen AI capability right inside of our content services platform. So core content, extended ECM, Documentum, all of these, even our core archive product, either have or will have an Aviator component with these capabilities, both being able to search and query and be able to generate new information and even kick off things like workflows. Some of this is in futures, and if you come to Open Text World or even AIM, we can talk to you more about what those are. We'd really, really like to talk to you about Aviator, what your projects are, and what you need out of it. But it's actually very, very cool now already. We're going to see some real changes in how people experience the content services environment. And of course, we have a huge focus on security and trust. And when I talk about trust there, one thing that we're learning, for example, is our Aviator, even though we're using Google Gemini as our large language model, how we communicate to Gemini is really an area of research for us. So we are learning how to read and deliver the information, whether it be text or images or video, audio, to Gemini in a way that is much more understandable and that we get better results out of it. And that's really what we're about. That will help us with navigation, help us with security, help us with accuracy. That's the end of my talk today. We're going to go into Q&A, but before I do, I want to make a plug that we will be at the AIM conference, and we have a keynote. Allison Clark is who I work for, and she's doing a keynote at the AIM conference. We have a booth there and we will be showing Aviator live, and would love to hear more about your requirements and what you'd like to do with Gen AI and your content. So
So
what questions do we have?
yeah, we have quite a few questions that came in. So I'm just going to kind of go through them, and thank you everyone for submitting. We welcome you to continue submitting as we go through them. Uh, One of our first one is, how critical is it to create or enhance existing taxonomies for Gen AI within the context of KM? Given the complexities inherent with global organizations, the maintenance of this seems close to impossible after the initial creation.
Yeah, in a way, I kind of agree with that. I mean, I don't think that, especially governmental organizations, are not going to be able to get rid of taxonomies, and you want to be able to use that for your labeling. But I believe that those taxonomies are not going to be sufficient for the kind of labeling that I'm talking about. You're going to need a much flattened and much more vertical, rather than hierarchical view of how you apply these labels. So I wouldn't put a lot of effort into being too formal about the taxonomy. Putting it in a spreadsheet and having it hierarchical is not a problem, but that's going to solve the labeling problem on its own.
Think that makes sense. Kind of in the same vein, how do you create a predictable AI structure in an environment where standards are ever changing? They kind of ask, is it possible that AI will be able to learn to predict and adapt to change based on the patterns from this with minimal intervention?
Yes, actually, because your information is not trained into the model, not presently. There are situations where you could certainly do that. And, we're looking at scenarios where people might train like medical terminology into it, and understanding of medical or accounting methods and things like that. But in general, it's actually at the time of the query, finding the right information through some magic of looking at your query, picking out some keywords out of that, and coming up with a list of documents that match it. So you don't have to do a lot of prep to get the answers, but the more curated and the more you understand and manage that content, the better the result you're going to get out of it. But it does not really matter. Interestingly, it doesn't matter that much which model you use. I mean, we're going with Gemini right now because we have a strategic relationship with Google, but we've built our architecture in a way that we can go with GPT or in the future or Claude or one of these other models. We're not stuck on Google, but we do feel that Google has a huge R&D effort going on. Gemini is an amazing model, and you'll get very similar results out of all of these models right now. But it's moving, and I think that new methods will be discovered, and we will keep up with those methodologies as we go. But fortunately, you don't have to do a lot of prep in massaging the model to get your information in.
Yeah. We started off this conversation, kind of going over where people are in their Gen AI journey. For those who are very early on, where do they start? You put a big emphasis on noisy content. So should it be starting with making sure that your data is clean?
I think that where you should start is where you can have quick wins. And quick wins are going to come from, like I said, reference materials where people are like a customer support or standard operating procedure manuals where people need to ask, what's the procedure for handling this particular situation, things like that. Those are quick wins. You can just dump the information in and probably get really reasonable answers out of it. Collaborative workspaces that are well managed, also, you're going to get quick wins out of that. Where you want to avoid is, like I said, just pulling in the last 10 years of that X drive on your network and saying, I wonder what's in here. Yeah, you can do that, but I would only give access to that to the 2 or 3 people in the organization. I would not unload that on the entire organization. You're going to have a potential disaster on your hands. So, and in between is a judgment call to a certain extent. How regulated are you? How worried are you about these? What's your risk profile with that data?
Yeah, I want to be conscious of our time. We are just about out, but I'd love to just give you one last moment, Mike, to give a key takeaway that someone might want to have if they watch this session that they can walk away with and bring to their team.
Well, a key takeaway would be to jump in. This is moving very fast. It feels like a freight train at high speed. It even does to us, some of us in the organization at some times. This is absolutely transformative. This is as big as the change from DOS to graphical user interfaces or the change to the internet. It's going to change the way we interact with computers. Your users are going to expect to be able to have these capabilities with their most important data, and your organization is going to expect you to do that in a safe way. So I think most organizations are not going to have a choice. And again, the good news is you're more important than ever before. You actually, believe it or not, have more power than ever before at implementing information management systems.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take a quick moment to reiterate what Mike mentioned, that AIM 24 is right around the corner. Registration is still open, so we hope to see everyone in San Antonio. It takes place the first week of April. There's an amazing roster of speakers, keynotes, pre-cons, and we invite everyone to go to aimconference.com for all the latest information. On that note, I want to thank everyone for being here today. Mike, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. We've really enjoyed picking your brain and all your ideas. And to our attendees, thank you so much to everyone for joining us live today.